AP 120, Chapter 11, How Hormones Are Regulated, Anterior and Posterior Pituitary Glands. So there are three mechanisms used by endocrine structures in order to control the release of hormones, because obviously we only want the hormones to be released when they're needed. So the first way is hormonal control. This means hormones that are released cause the release of other hormones and other endocrine structures. So this cascade of hormones usually starts with the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus, as we know, is part of the brain, and it releases tropic hormones. These are hormones that affect other endocrine structures, and they go and affect the anterior pituitary gland, causing it to release or stop releasing hormones. Then the anterior pituitary gland will release its tropic hormones that go to the target endocrine gland or structure, causing that peripheral gland to release its hormones that go to the target cells and then lead to the desired effect. So again, we have a cascade of hormones, the hypothalamus releasing tropic hormones that control the anterior pituitary gland, causing the anterior pituitary gland to release tropic hormones that affect some other endocrine structure, causing it to produce its hormone, goes to the target cell and causes the effect. And the negative feedback to control this process comes from these different hormones being present in the bloodstream. So when the system detects the final hormone that has been produced, it can tell the hypothalamus to stop triggering the release of hormones. Then we have a neural system where you have a direct nerve that will actually cause the release of the hormone. So a nervous system sends a nerve impulse via a neuron to an endocrine structure, causing it to release a hormone. Hormone goes to the target cell and causes an effect. And whatever that effect is, that result is what is causing the negative feedback. So when the nervous system sees that the action it wants has occurred, it stops signaling for the hormone to be produced. And then the third way is through monitoring the blood. So the composition of the blood itself, sometimes called humoral control. So some substance, the level of that substance in the blood plasma changes. This change acts as a positive mechanism that signals the endocrine gland to produce its hormone. Hormone goes to target cells, causing an effect on the levels of that substance. And when the substance returns to its ideal levels, that is the negative feedback that stops the release of more hormone. So again, some substance changes its amount in the plasma, blood plasma. Endocrine gland detects this, produces its hormone, goes to target cells, and then causes the levels to return to normal, and that is the negative feedback. So again, hormones, often many hormones are always at a certain level in the bloodstream because they're being released or suppressed to help control some sort of substance that's being regulated. So when there's a little too much hormone, then it's overdoing it, so you stop producing hormones. And when there's a little too little hormone, then you start producing it again to cause the desired effect, and so on. So there's always a fluctuation in hormone levels, but there is a steady average over time. Here's an example. Let's say you're really hungry, so you eat some lunch. This will cause an increase of glucose blood levels, so the amount of glucose in the blood goes up. This triggers the pancreas to release insulin, the hormone insulin. One of the things that does is goes to the liver and other cells, triggering those cells to take glucose out of the bloodstream. This will then eventually cause glucose levels to return to normal, and that is the signal to stop producing insulin. So when the glucose levels return to normal, pancreas will stop releasing insulin. All right, so the master controllers of the endocrine system is considered the hypothalamus and to a smaller degree the anterior pituitary gland. So the hypothalamus part of the brain is considered the master controller of the endocrine system. So the hypothalamus produces hormones that control activity of the anterior pituitary gland. So it has releasing hormones that it releases that goes to the anterior pituitary gland, causing the anterior pituitary gland to produce its hormones. And the hypothalamus can also secrete inhibiting hormones, go to the anterior pituitary gland, and cause it to stop producing its hormones. And the way the hypothalamus does this is it releases its hormones into a blood capillary bed that's next to the hypothalamus. Then the hormones travel through the bloodstream through a vein and then leave the bloodstream through another capillary bed to affect the anterior pituitary gland. And this system where you have two capillary beds connected by a vein, that is a portal vein system. And so this is specifically the hypophyseal portal vein, where a vein is connecting two blood capillary beds. So the anterior pituitary gland produces a bunch of hormones. One hormone is the growth hormone. The growth hormone, when released, will affect many, many different tissues in the body, especially tissues that are actively growing or can actively grow. So it affects bone tissue, muscle tissue, adipose tissue, and so on, causing the body to get bigger, as it were. Very important when we're children and teenagers. Then there's the hormone prolactin. Prolactin, when released, will travel to the mammary glands and stimulate milk production. So prolactin is a hormone that causes the production of milk by the mammary glands. It has some other functions that we don't really fully understand. We know this because men produce prolactin to some level. But the main function that is fully understood is milk production. Then there's the thyroid stimulating hormone. The thyroid stimulating hormone, surprise, surprise, goes to the thyroid gland, causing the thyroid gland to produce the thyroid hormone. So thyroid stimulating hormone stimulates the thyroid gland to produce the thyroid hormone. So the thyroid releasing hormone leaves the hypothalamus, goes to the anterior pituitary gland, causing it to release the thyroid stimulating hormone that then travels through the bloodstream to the thyroid gland. It gets to the thyroid gland, it causes the thyroid gland to secrete the thyroid hormone. That, of course, goes into the bloodstream, travels to all the various target cells, causing the proper effect. And it's this effect, when it occurs, as well as the levels of hormones, thyroid stimulating hormone and thyroid stimulating hormone releasing hormone, that act as a negative feedback. So we need lots of hormones causing the change. Then the hypothalamus and anterior pituitary gland detect those hormones and stop producing more. All right, hormone number 4 produced by the anterior pituitary gland is the adrenocorticotropic hormone. Adrenocorticotropic hormone goes to the adrenal cortex, which is the outer portion of the adrenal gland, and causes the adrenal cortex to produce and release corticosteroids. So this is a family of steroids that include cortisol that the adrenal cortex will release when activated by this hormone. The anterior pituitary gland also produces follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. These two hormones affect the gonads, either the testes or the ovaries, and they are involved in the development of gametes. So testes, the production of sperm, ovaries, the production of oocytes. And we'll learn a lot more about that when we get to the reproductive system. So 6 hormones produced by the anterior pituitary gland: growth hormone, prolactin, thyroid stimulating hormone, adrenocorticotropic hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, and luteinizing hormone. Now, pituitary dwarfism is caused by hyposecretion of growth hormone. This is when the individual does not produce the expected sufficient amounts of growth hormone. Hypo, less, and because of that, they do not reach the height that is considered normal for human beings. And then you can have the other extreme, gigantism, where the person has hypersecretion of growth hormone. They produce too much growth hormone during childhood, and this causes the person to get significantly larger than would be expected for the average human. All right, posterior pituitary gland. Posterior pituitary gland is in the back. So the pituitary gland is made up of 2 glands, the anterior pituitary gland, which we talked about, and the posterior pituitary gland. The posterior pituitary gland stores hormones made by the hypothalamus. So there are two hormones the hypothalamus produces and sends directly into the posterior pituitary gland via modified neurons. And then when those hormones need to be released, the hypothalamus does a nerve impulse to cause the release of those hormones. So what are the two hormones stored by the posterior pituitary gland? Well, first is antidiuretic hormone. Antidiuretic hormone is released to counter dehydration. So when the blood volume gets low, that will cause blood pressure to go down. And if that gets too severe, that could cause major problems. So this decrease in blood volume can trigger the release of antidiuretic hormone to try to counter that dehydration. And what it does is it goes and affects the kidneys, causes the kidneys to increase water retention. So as the kidneys are producing urine, they make more concentrated urine. So there's less water in the urine, making the urine a darker color. Now, some water has to get used for this process, but antidiuretic hormone decreases the amount the kidneys is going to use. The other effect is vasoconstriction of blood vessels. So the antidiuretic hormone causes many blood vessels to constrict, and that will increase blood pressure. And that's a way to try to counter the low blood volume and the resulting low blood pressure, because if blood pressure gets too low, then blood cannot reach all the tissues it needs to, and that can lead to a lot of problems. The second hormone is oxytocin. Oxytocin is found in both males and females. In females, it stimulates smooth muscle contractions in the uterus, aka during labor. So females produce a lot of oxytocin during the childbirthing process. The other thing oxytocin stimulates is milk ejection, so the release of milk by the mammary glands. So again, prolactin causes the production of milk. Oxytocin causes the ejection, the release of milk. And the main signal for that is, of course, the infant suckling. Males also produce oxytocin, and it stimulates smooth muscle contractions in the male reproductive tract. However, it has also been found that oxytocin has another apparent effect. It makes people more trusting of other people, more caring about other people. So oxytocin is sometimes called the cuddle hormone. It's thought perhaps that the large amounts of oxytocin during the childbirth process helps the woman bond with the infant. But it also has similar effects in males. All right, that is it for this part of chapter 11.